Hey, I've been awake all of 20 minutes. Um, so I got an email from Matthew in Finland. I hope I said that right. About how to start reading Thibault and how to start working with it. Now, for his journey, at the moment he's in a longsword club and no one's doing rapier at all, so that's definitely a solid, like, oh, you're gonna pick up the Nightmare book. Nice. I love that for you. This is gonna be fun. And he had a few questions. Firstly, like, how to start with it. To start with it is really hard. Mostly because you need probably the whirlwinding kind of charisma to whirlwind maybe a best friend or one of your favorite training partners into doing rapier with you. Then being that same force of nature on multiple people so that you're constantly working with different stimulus and different ideas and different attempts to foil what you're doing. And that can be hard. The only true advice I can give is what I've lived. I started fencing with Woody during the pandemic because we lived within 5 kilometers of each other, and due to restrictions in Australia, you could only travel like up to 5Ks in a circle from where you lived for a few months at a time. Sounds actually pretty wild now on the other side of that. And he was already one of the best rapier fencers in Australia. As we were fencing with each other and training together, he would explain certain things that are like from Caballero or from Fabris, and then I went and bought Fabris and just started reading it and working on it because it was filling in a bunch of data points that were missing from the rest of my fencing. This is why I think people should read Fabris first before Thibault. So I was reading that, then met Chris Godwin, who is a tremendous fencer, and he was the only person in Australia that was doing Thibault without getting double disengaged hip thrust over and over. But he came from a background of also learning classical fencing and sport fencing, and to a very high level. Very fucking good. So that was making figuring out Thibault easier for him. I started off the sentiment section, chapter 9. If you skip all the way to chapter 9 and start reading about sentiment, you will learn a lot, and there will be so much in it that you're like, I don't know what the fuck that's saying. I can guess it means this, and then just move on. And then you'll come back to that chapter once you go, alright, I should actually read this part of the book, and I should read from the start. And you'll come back to it and be like, ooh, I was doing the right vibe of this, but overall I was doing this wrong. But it's fine, like, as long as you keep getting the vibes out of chapters, that's where your progress will be. Having a real good crack at a chapter, like, hey, I think it's this. Absolutely believe it in your heart that you're right, and then be absolutely ready to find out how wrong you were in a few months' time. And you just keep rinse and repeating that. Also, using things from Fabris can help with the fact that you're doing rapier from the start. the first third of Fabris is really good because it's got parts on Missouri Lager, Missouri Strata, not flinging the sword, how to work against cuts, strong and weak. All these interactions, they're broader, more nebulous things that you will slowly pick up out of Thibault. But your ability to skip long periods of trying to figure stuff out makes reading Fabris very powerful and useful. You have the instances, which is the distances in Thibault. The first instance is most of the time like you can mark it on the square, but most of the time it's the distance of the closest you can get before either person's quillions can pass the tip of the sword. This is mechanically working the same as Lager. Missouri Lager is a little easier as a concept because it's got a bit more wiggle room forward and back. That is defined as the distance where the other person must step to hit you. Must lunge to hit you. So yeah, that's a bit more open-ended. So you come to first instance, and then you come to second instance, where the tip of either person's sword will be anywhere between like the middle of the forearm to the elbow. This is pretty much Strata. Strata is defined as you can lean to touch the person, and it's at the hip hinge. You'll notice there's a lot of hip hinging in Thibault, only from like second instance onwards, sometimes even at first instance, and lots of hip hinging at the later chunks of the book. This is where he's got a lot of his Italian fencing traits. I strongly suggest keeping away from other Destreza systems as long as possible, especially modern interpretations of Destreza systems, because there's lots of this romanticized baggage that is holding it back. Don't tell the Destreza people I feel that. It'll hurt their feelings. You're gonna have to get a sword. You're gonna have to get a Thibault rapier. You don't need to get it perfectly to your specs. You do need to get it long enough. A short rapier with it will feel wrong, and you'll struggle to make the touches that you're looking for, and you'll get a bit sporadic. A light rapier, so anything sub 1 kilo, will feel skittish and bouncy. You do want it flexible because you will be stabbing your friends in the eyes. The eye line, the face, just the fact that the front of the mask is like up to, especially when people are stressed, like up to half a foot closer in interactions than any other portion of the body, can really affect what's going on. And if you're not stabbing people in the face, things get squirrely. Out of politeness, I stab people a lot here, and then like stabbing someone here usually frees their weak, and then they're able to double, but stabbing them here keeps you constraining their weak, which is really cool. That's just like one pitfall that I'm rewiring. What else is important for this? A lot of people get caught up in how important these are. They are. But they're not. It is as important as getting the data across to yourself and to whoever you're talking to and teaching. It is not important enough that you not having it on the ground should stop you. You can also pick particular points and really simplify it a lot of the time. Like if you look at the... where's my camera? There. So you've got the square overall. This looks a bit wonky, and it's because of how I'm holding my hand to the camera. It's not that wonky in real life. There we go. So you have the outer square, and then you've also got this little square inside the circle. You can just do that inside the circle square as a diamond for you and your friend to stand on each corner of. And then the halfway points, those are your instances. So you go from like... I wish I set this up on a tripod because now I'm holding my phone and I'm trying to point at points on here. Anyway, you can work on that inner square to do a lot of the first half of the book. And you can start adding the traits on like... what I do is I use electrical tape and I'll set it up. I use my rapier as a measuring stick, as you kind of should. The cross through the middle, like the really gnarly cross in the middle, those lines to each of the corners of the square are the exact length of your rapier to your hilt. Which then makes things a lot easier, right? You can just do an X, so like those 4 lines of that cross can all point out to the square. That's all done by your rapier, so then you just fill in the blanks. What else? You can also... Oh, that's right. You can do the outermost square really easily. The very subtle X that goes through the circle, those are also the same length as the rapier, which means that the outermost square is 2 rapiers long, 2 rapiers wide. And all of a sudden, doing the circle part just kind of falls into place once you line everything else up. Because you've got a couple of squares within squares. Does that make sense? Yeah. These are all important as long as you're getting the right angle of step. Like the subjection? Yes. Sorry, I thought I nearly said atajo without thinking. The subjection to the inside is really aggressive and really steep. And you really close some fucking distance. Even though you're stepping out and around, you're closing distance. And the amount of distance that you're closing to get to second instance is the same. You're taking a long step at a weird angle to go from Missouri Lager to Missouri Stretta. That is a vicious distance crunch. Which that ties into, you should also look at Fabris. Once you have read through the first parts, a lot of the plates for Fabris is just, here's how it should look in case you can't perceive it due to what's written. That's normal and okay. You get to his second book of Proceeding with Resolution, where the whole goal is no longer how to answer answers with answers, but it's teaching you how to pull your sword out, walk the 6 paces towards the person, and hit them in the one tempo they give or do not give. And that proceeding with resolution is quite, not only is it a bit main character-like, but it's quite intense. All of Thibault's chapters are how to proceed with, they are doing this kind of shape. It could be that they're sitting with a retracted arm and the sword pointed at you. It could be sitting with a retracted arm and the sword pointing across. It could be that they're doing a right angle. They're doing a bastardized right angle where they cover their face. They're doing all these other things where here is the example position. Here are data points on how to do it. And you need to walk forwards and beat Zachary. So it has a very proceeding-like feel to it. And certain parts you'll get to, and initially you won't believe that is what you're meant to be able to do. And he even says it in the book, which is quite funny. And certain parts you're going to not get for a couple of years because they're skittish, they're spicy. You'll need data points from something else, or you'll need to figure out some other puzzles for that to suddenly make sense. I've had the thrust at them, hard parry, step round, cut front of the face, cut behind the head. That has made sense to do in only a couple of drills. And I think my own hang-ups and worries and jumps have stopped me having it organically wish to occur in like competition. Not that I'm saying you should fucking run around cutting people in the back of the head in comps. But you will have parts where it'll be your own baggage, and it'll be due to slight differences that you will feel like, oh, I don't want to do that, that's scary. Or, I'll just do this, wonk. And just, I don't know, one-handed zwir someone instead of release, cut, face, step round. Or one-handed shill howl because they've done the hard pressure and just one-handed shill instead of constrain, release, press, horizontal cut to the face. You'll have all these moments where you kind of do what feels better for a bit and then slowly develop oh, this is how I'm meant to be doing this. This is a long ramble and hopefully it helps. I'm going to go back to the sword part. There's a bunch of things that you will either figure out or not, and I'd rather just say them than not. You need a long enough rapier. Even slightly longer is fine, especially when you're a bit like, stepping in past points is spooky. The handle construction is immensely important. All my swords are currently in the car. What can I show this with? Okay, I'm just gonna... I'm at home, and so ignore anything that looks messy in the background. I can show this with lap swords, can't I? Yes, that's probably the play. Actually, this synthetic messer is hilarious. Sorry, might work. Alright, I'm going to use this LARP sword to show the hand position, because it has all the artifacts that I need you to care about. So, we have this. Funny. You're going to be holding the sword, like how I talk about in another video of how to hold the sword for Thibault. So, like, we can skip that phase. When you hold it, hold most rapiers in a traditional Italian grip, something like this. Notice I'm not doing the closed key thing. Closed key is bullshit, and I will not elaborate. So, open up this hand, have it go along the hand, have the back of your hand over the top of it for a lot of the time. So you've got this kind of thing going on. This should feel kind of like your right hand for longsword, unless you're constantly wearing spez heavies or sparring gloves, things that like really just force hammer fist on everything. Then maybe get something with a bit more room, because you want something like this. Now, the reason I'm showing this Italian grip is the pommel gets to dig into the wrist in a really positive way, but also this space here allows that when you tense and you dig into the pommel, the angle of your sword doesn't get all squirrely. Notice how my elbow to my point is mostly straight. This is useful so that you can go, ah, and have this moment of like, fuck, especially dealing with cuts or beats or hard pressures or hard sentiments. You can just go, ah, fuck, and then not have it displaced so easily. The Thibault grip actively goes to shit with a bulbous pommel. Because the moment you go, ah, what happens is, now we're going to pretend I'm holding Thibault grip because this handle is just long. I wish I just had my rapier. I should have just grabbed it out of the car before I did this. Boom. As that pommel gets bigger, the more your wrist needs to do this to be able to keep the point on line. And like, yeah, I just straighten out, that's fine. But it's still a bit, I've got to create all this space here because the pommel's digging in. And that means when I go, this happens. The bracing of my arm forces the tip up. And the longer your sword is, the higher it goes up, right? Levers. So if you have a bulbous tip on your bulbous pommel on your sword, you can remove the knuckle bow, and that's fine, and you'll get a good Thibault rapier. But you want a really long, thin pommel, like he suggests, because it extends and makes the handle longer. Most, I'm going to use darkwood as my example. Most darkwood handles are too short. But if you have like the scent stopper pommel or something like that, where actually the pommel becomes part of the handle and then there's a bulbous bit actually further down, that's what I currently use, and that doesn't give me any grief. So I get to have this very long, dainty hand that sits like this, like nice and long, and I sit over the top, and then I can be on either side of the quillions. Fine. But I think probably something more like a traditional like French foil pommel, something that looks about that shape, you're gonna have a better time because it just doesn't, it gets to run the stick along. But this space that you can do with an Italian grip through here is you can't get the same with, because you're interacting with the quillions, right? And you can't get the same with the Thibault grip. So you will, how I started was I had my Darkwood Pappenheimer and I grabbed some pliers and I bent my knuckle bow just out the fucking way. So it was around like that, and I just bent it all the way over so it wasn't in the way. That means that I could have my wrist rotate round the side as per needed, because like positions like this turn up. And then I still also need to be able to get on the other side, and then the knuckle bow gets in the way. So like, you can choose to have like, oh, I can get to my hammer fist or my hammer grip or my thumb on this side of the quillions as I circle round. Damn it. Boom, circle round and free my thumb. And I can do all this. That should show up in Thibault. But I can't do the normal ass grip because there's now a knuckle bow in the way. So you're going to get good at not having a knuckle bow. That bulbous nature of the pommel interacting also will happen if you're wearing thick gloves that keep your wrists safe from people who cut. I genuinely wouldn't be able to do rapier if I had gloves that had excessive padding around the wrist, because every time I would tense, my point would move. Imagine you just made this pommel that I've already just been talking about. Even this much pommel is enough that I've got to create space here. And this is a tiny pommel. Is enough to be putting my point up a little. If your glove is doing that, every time you go, fuck, we tense, or there's like a moment, your point's going to dart to the sky. That's not fun. So I strongly suggest getting a hold of some foil gloves. We really like the Leon Paul Coach's foil glove because it just has no excessive anything there, so you can actually get the long dainty hand positions, and that'll make reaching in the thrusts when you're a bit spooked and a bit scared work. Wow, I have no swords on hand, but I've got like a glove like this. This is my common offhand glove. This as a main hand, this pad right here will fuck your entire rapier fencing. Anyone who says that they're fine and deal with it, I don't have time for. What else? We've covered the square is important and not. If you can have it printed on something, if you can have it printed on something, you don't need to put it on your hands. You will constantly be referring to it for a while. You just need to be able to refer to it. You don't need it on the ground. As long as you're getting your instances correct, which he talks about that like in the 5th chapter, so you'll be fine. You're going to reread it. Every time you reread a chapter, and it'll be one that, like, especially like a chapter that you think you know well, and you'll look at it and you'll be like, where the fuck was half this data last time I read this? Because your brain will constantly cherry pick the most important parts, and you can't take it all in. And you'll feel a little fried every time you read a chapter. You will work a chapter at a time, a month at the fastest. That's fine. All the outcomes are as much your opponent's choice as yours. The only thing I really choose is the distance and my initial moments. Then the other person chooses what I'm solving. This is hard. This is how I fence overall. I don't really know what the fuck I'm doing until I've won. I don't like that wording. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing until it's over. Until I go like, oh, and then I did this answer to answer that. Did that work? Yes, cool. Or, oh, they're doing this. That means I do this to finish the bout. And that was informed by the 1 to 5 steps before. You will get restless and want to do your second instance and even third instance stuff. You will actively fence worse when you're trying to make that happen. And it's fine. Let yourself be a white belt. Let yourself be a yellow belt. You will get worse for a while. You will be worse at fencing. You will hit a point where 80%, 90% of your hits are happening at first instance / Missouri Lager. And there'll be parts of Thibault that statistically I wouldn't be shocked if you just never get to experience them, because no one around you is doing exactly that action to make you do it. And it's quite funny. Whenever you're kind of sick of it or bored of it, or you feel like you're struggling with something always needs to change for things to change. Improvement and progress is the exact diametric opposite. Like, admitting that something needs to improve, something needs to progress, is the same as admitting something isn't good enough, something isn't right. Getting caught up on one half of that whole coin and not accepting the other half is where you get your plateaus and where you get stuck. Take frequent and constant little holidays into Fabris and working on chunks out of that. It's alluded to in Michael Greer's translation that Fabris, that Thibault obviously knew Fabris fencing and contemporary Italian fencing and contemporary German fencing of the period before he went over to Spain. He has some references that suggest such. The more I look at both, maybe it's biases, maybe it's my own want for maybe such a thing. The joke thing to me is that this seems like the closest you could do Fabris while pretending you're doing Destreza. So constant, frequent little journeys over to reading Fabris will help you find other data points that are definitely in Thibault, and then you'll make connections in really beautiful ways, and that'll reinforce ideas. There's a bunch of ideas in it that you'll have in the back of your head burrowing, but you'll experience it in a different way, and it will just pop, and that'll be really cool. What else? Talked about the sword, talked about the circle, talked about the book, talked about different chapters and the journey. I can't think of anything else. It's also 35 minutes of this. It's a bit late to tell you to listen to this at 2 times speed. It's going to be hard for a while. Feel free to bug me. I'm sorry that I haven't been posting more circle videos. Genuinely, like, it's not even like, oh yeah, I've dropped off from training or I've had stuff up. No, I've I've been working my ass off at training with a bunch of stuff that is just more important than me putting out videos. Which is a nice problem to have. So the second I can have some breathing room and not be like, no, I need to drill this every chance I get, then I'll be able to do some more circle videos. And hopefully it makes my circle videos better. Yeah, I hope this helps. If it doesn't, that'll be funny.